Great to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. I've never been asked to talk about our work abroad before, so it's quite a surprise, and it's made me kind of think a little bit about it. It's never been kind of really core to our work, although I have to say over the last 10 years, it's accounted for about 10% or so on an annual basis. I would put ourselves, following on what Chris was saying, we're very much in the reactive kind of mode. Occasionally we get really proactive and get really excited and nothing much happens. But I thought what I'd do is just tell you a little bit about our work abroad and how that work has come to us, because it's quite interesting. It's been quite interesting for me to find that out, and show you a few buildings as well. But I thought I'd start with, what the world is really. And so this is a conventional kind of projection of the world. This one is much more where population is proportional to land area. This one is one where, sorry, that one was where the actual land area is more accurately drawn, if you like. This one is where population is proportional to land area. So if you're looking for big markets, you kind of know where to go, and that's where they are. This one, interestingly, is where wealth is proportional to land area. And so, the extraordinary growth of the US there, and the Middle East becomes large, and India remains about the same as it is. China is also growing fast. And it's interesting that Africa kind of shrinks away to nothing. But if you actually go back to this one, interestingly there, someone was telling me that, the conventional, a few years ago, you used to be able to think of land mass. Roughly, the population of the world would be divided into America, you could say that's one unit, the Americas. Europe, you could say that's one unit. Africa, you could say that's one unit. And the rest of Asia is 3 units. 1, 1, 1, 3. And they said in 20 years' time, it's going to be 1, 1, 3, 4. So Africa is 3, Asia is 4. Which is a very interesting point to think about if you're looking in the longer term, because people, if they don't die, require enormous amounts of development. And that's, for us, a lot of our work is in Africa, but that's purely for charitable purposes. It's because of that bit on the map there. And of course this, which is the opposite of that, is where poverty lies. And again, that's why we're doing quite a lot of work in East Africa, as part of our own little charitable trust. But the other thing, the other thing to think about, I would suggest, there's lots of people in the audience that probably know more about this than me, but start with the people who work for you. Do you have any foreign nationals? We happen to have, we're about 30% foreign, and they have been the source for a lot of our work. So 40 different nationalities there. The other thing that we kind of occasionally think about, well, is what are we known for, and do we have that reputation internationally? And I guess we are and have been known for environmental design, and lots of parts of the world are very interested in that. When we won the Sterling Prize, the world got to know about us. Unfortunately, in 2008, we got the Sterling Prize, and there was a global financial crash, and we got very little from it. But people still recognize that. You can still go abroad with a Sterling Prize badge. You RIBA people will like to know, and people listen to you. We're also known for higher education projects, and there is a lot of global movement in higher education, and there's a lot of interest from one country to another in what's going on in higher education. So going to the delightfully termed SCUP conference, which is the Society of Principals and Universities and something or other in the United States. We haven't done it yet, but it's kind of something that we're kind of interested in. We're also developing a reputation globally for creative reuse, and the world is very interested in that. Particularly conservation skills in this country are renowned, and we have a tiny, 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 tiny bit of them. And we're also growing in a reputation for cultural projects. And again, you see that within sector-specific areas, people talk to each other globally. So some time ago, we kind of looked at, what are the criteria that we would look at for thinking about working abroad? And we put ethical pretty much at the top of the list. But then we looked at all the human rights records of the countries we were already working in at that time, and they were pretty abysmal. And, you know, at the moment we're doing quite a lot of work in the States, and that, you know, you have to kind of take that quite seriously as a human rights issue. But in general, you know, the question, do we trust the individuals in the client team, is one that kind of comes up quite regularly. We had a debate the other day in a partners meeting. Do we, yet again, you know, an inquiry from Saudi Arabia, we've always turned them down, and we turned it down again. And I think it's just a kind of, it's very difficult to say why, but there is a visceral reaction amongst myself and my partners to working there. Environmental, one of the things that made us work abroad was actually kind of thinking, well, actually we've learned a lot in our own country about environmental issues, and we think that it would be very interesting to learn about other countries' climates. And can we reduce energy consumption in buildings? Can we, and actually does that include, but do you take into account the cost of flying? I did lots of calculations at one stage about doing a housing scheme in Seattle and realized that we could fly there every month and we could still save energy if they adopted all the low energy measures that we took out to them. Will we learn something new from the project? Will it inspire us? And also, will they build what we design? Can we get paid? Very, very basic stuff. What are the exchange rate risks, etc., and legal and tax issues? Do we have trusted partners there? We very rarely delivered anything abroad where we don't have a person that we know there that we trust, and a partner that we can work with. Is the travel distance manageable? And things like, you know, does the work contribute to our overall reputation, or is there a reputational risk? And can we get, you know, commercially, can we get good press coverage locally and internationally? So I'll just show you a few things about, these are the projects that we've done abroad. It was quite remarkable to put these dots on the map. I hadn't realized we'd done so much. So that we've got previous projects, live projects, charity projects, and workplaces where we've done bids and competitions. So just going through them in order, and I'll just mention just a few things about each one, really how we came to get the project or do the project. Our RIBA competition. We don't do many of them, particularly when they're open competitions, but when we have done them, they are very well run, and this one we won, and after 5 years we delivered it. It's a new art gallery and a residential block to pay for the art gallery in Nicosia. Fantastic experience, really. This is the models that we took along to the competition, by the way. And it's, you know, it's amazing, privately endowed by the Leventis Foundation, who are very close to Oxbridge, to a lot of archaeological departments in this country. Very Cypriot, very proud Cypriots. View from the top of the building, view from in courtyards halfway down, and staircases, and you know, an architecture that we were able to live. It was quite a struggle, particularly as the recession hit in Cyprus just as we started to build. So our local architect partner, who was absolutely delightful, he was 83, the guy who was supervising this project. He was great, absolutely amazing. Andreas Philippou, one of the best architects in Cyprus, and we were very lucky to have that partnership to work with. And what it did for us was actually added another really significant gallery to our portfolio. University of Washington Student Housing. How do we get that? I went and gave a couple of lectures in the States on the East Coast as a guest of the US Green Building Council. So I went to 2 universities where I met up with people who had worked with me previously. One was in Washington, one was in Vancouver. One was in Seattle and one was in Vancouver. And out of that came 2 projects where we used those 2 ex-employees as collaborators. And this was one of them. Didn't go desperately well on site. The cladding system had to be cut and cut and cut and cut, value engineered out almost down to the bare bones. But very popular student housing scheme for the University of Seattle. This one is a bit earlier, and this came from, is Elena Marco here? No, Jelena Marker, who runs University of West England, was working with me at the time from Barcelona, but knew about this project in Spain. And I think she was responsible for getting it tested. She certainly delivered this project on site. And it was an exemplar low-energy scheme and with stack ventilation you can see through the chimneys that emerge from this. It's a affordable housing scheme on the edge of Madrid. This is an interesting one. Another student project. I teach at Bath regularly, and there was a Chinese student who was the worst student in the year. So it's a long time ago, and you won't know, well, remember his name, etc. But anyway, he came to me a year after he'd graduated, and he said, my father is the president of Hunan province or whatever, and we're interested in building this resort spa hotel development in on an ex-steelworks site in my province. And we said, is there any money involved for us if we do some design work for you? Yes, there's £25,000. So we did a scheme, £25,000. We went over there and we presented it. And Alex probably knows who this student is. And we came back and they called us up a couple of weeks later and they said, you've won the competition. And we said, well, we didn't realize it was a competition. But anyway, it's nice to have won. And they said, would you like to do the rest of the job? And we said, yes, probably. Is there any money? And they said, yes, we'll pay you £75,000 for the whole of the working drawings. And we sort of calculated about 2 million, really. So we said politely, no thanks. And but then we did find that they just built it anyway. So fine, but you're better off out of things like that. Another Chinese project, this through the Building Research Establishment, for whom we'd done a building, and we knew the landscape designers involved in this scheme. And this was the first BREEAM outstanding project in China. Great, really, really good. This went very well throughout the whole of the design development and technical development. And they began to build it. As you'll see, these are on the left-hand side are our CGIs, on the right-hand side is the building that they built. But halfway through, they decided not to do it as an exemplar building, and they just made it into a kind of housing scheme. So, not having control over things like that is something that is a bit disheartening, particularly when you put huge amounts of effort into it. For a long time, pre the Gaddafi wars, etc., we were working in Libya. And this came through a conversation with Mark Whitby, who was doing some work there, Mark Whitby of Rambol and formerly Whitby Bird, doing some work on a sustainability scheme for the Green Mountain area, and we were asked to look at a sustainability design guide for the Green Mountains, which is an area around Benghazi, but also another one for the Fezzan, which is the desert, the Sahara. Absolutely fascinating set of to a couple of projects, which we were nominally paid for, and we got to thinking, well, this could really change Libyan society. Be really, we were passionately concerned and involved, and a lot of us within the practice were a bit too concerned, firstly about safety, and secondly about politics at that time. But if you are asked to come into a country and say, let's look at sustainability design guides for the country, do you turn them down? I don't know. It's difficult. That's a difficult one. We didn't, and we did that, and we produced this exemplar scheme and this design report. 6 months later, all hell let loose, and the client body effectively disappeared, and it descended into chaos. I still don't regret it. We did sort of try to make contact with the people after the disastrous war there, but its safety prevented us from going back in. Live projects, just very briefly. A big scheme in Toronto for this University of Toronto. How did this came about through, oh God, right, 5 minutes, okay, fine. environmental contacts, global environmental contacts, an organization called Cape Farewell. We met up with someone who shared the same environmental principles, and we just went to an interview and got this competition, CGI's, and it's now being built on site. So fantastic opportunity, just through personal contacts. Berlin studios for one of our clients in London, who we very rarely do private housing, but we did a private house for him. And then he said, well, would you like to come and convert these studios in Berlin for me? So, school for the Aga Khan Academy, went for an interview to be on their list to grow a series of schools throughout the world in the poorest Islamic countries of the world. So this has been quite a struggle, but working again with an extraordinary local architect called Chatoto in Bangladesh, just about to go on site, and potentially really, really interesting. And another one that we're working on at the moment in Jordan, you know. So again, there were conversations about this from an ethical and a perspective. You know, we're working here for the autocratic Jordanian royal family. But we happen to be working for a princess who is a 55-year-old divorcee whose two passions in life are the women's liberation in Jordan and the scientific establishment, the scientific community in Jordan. So for me, it's a no-brainer. Obviously, we would do something like that, and this could potentially turn into one of the biggest projects in the office. Myanmar, this came through the Prince's Foundation, believe it or not. You know, an organization called Turquoise Mountain, which was supported by the Prince's Foundation, when we'd done a project for them in Middleport Pottery, and it's looking at this old building in Yangon and converting it into an arts and cultural center. And Jeff Rich is going off on an Article 25 tour next month, which is partially in support of that building. Charity projects. This has been going for about 15 years. It grew up with Richard Fielden, who lived and worked out in Uganda. And the first project we built became the Richard Fielden Clinic, named after he died, and we set up the Richard Fielden Foundation. And we've now been back and done a second extension to that project, and extraordinarily successful, working with compressed earth bricks and a very simple timber frame. And we've had Max Fordham monitoring the performance of the buildings. It's incredibly successful. You know, we wouldn't have expanded it, doubled its size if it hadn't been. Currently, we're working on New Generation Village, which is for street children in Burundi, where we have done several schools in Uganda. This was the first one we did after Richard's. Richard always used to say, onwards and upwards. And so we christened the name. They christened the name after that, after his saying. This is how you build there. You know, you build there's no power tools, there's no electricity, there's no pieces of timber more than 3 meters long. So it is kind of lashed together incredibly cheaply. And this one we had a lot of fun with in Chennai, some people who knew a charity down there looking after orphans in Madras, Chennai. And we worked with someone who is an expert in bending bamboo, and made this extraordinary theatre structure in their playground. And currently we're working on this project in Rwanda, which is using the first laminated timber to come out of East Africa. Finally, a few competitions. We don't enter these very often, but here's one where we just managed to lose it. We think it's for a new cultural center in Oman, which unlike most of the Middle East, is an extraordinary civilized country, it seems to me, with extraordinary history and culture. So we enjoyed putting this competition entry together. I'm going to skip through it because we didn't win it, and shame. Lots of discussion over this. Before I knew it, someone had entered this competition for the National Library of Israel, and we were shortlisted. And I was very skeptical about it. Didn't seem right to me, but anyway, that didn't go ahead, and now Herzog and de Boer are doing it. We just missed this one. We beat Foster's but lost to Henning Larsen, this is in the University of Cincinnati, which is a kind of treasure chest of everybody's done a building there. You know, Gehry, Tom Main, Zaha, etc. So it was a real interesting challenge, and this is the way we approached it, looking at different options of the way we might put a building on this site. And finally, one that we are shortlisted for as of last week, which is great, an open competition, where we're down to the last 3 out of 120 for a concert hall in Kaunas. Very rarely do we do those, but we did it because we just finished the Birmingham Conservatoire, and the team were just really raring to go on the next one. And, you know, so we use that to actually get people's enthusiasm, play to people's enthusiasm, as we do with all the charitable work, incidentally. I mean, that is totally now driven by the young people in our practice. They love it. All we do is provide them with some a bit of money, a half salary while they're there, and expenses. So our checklist, you can. I'll leave a copy of this because I haven't got time to go through it. But you know, will it meet some of those key criteria for us? Will it be a game changer? Will it enable us to get projects in the UK? Does it have an interesting social agenda? What of that? What are the ideologies? What ideologies do we share with the client in terms of education, equality, inclusion? Is the country one we feel comfortable in? If the answer is yes, fine. If no, does working on that for that particular client counter our country? That should say our what does that say? I can't remember. Anyway, are we happy sending our staff into the country? Is it safe? Issues like those are things that we ask whenever we're going abroad. And, you know, can we make any money? Can you cover our costs? So my concluding thoughts are, you know, it's important to forge local partnerships to understand local regulations. It's important to play to your strengths in terms of building type and specialist expertise. Very important to use the contacts of the people who have worked for you or are working for you. Make sure you trust the client ethically and commercially, and think of it, as we always do, of it as a two-way learning process. So we're learning from the experience as well. And also, I mean, this comes back to the reactive proactive thing. Seize the opportunities. Sometimes it's very difficult to afford to be proactive, but you can be reactive and jump at opportunities. Thank you very much.